Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's Exploring Divine Resonance Circle. It's our 13th week together in this circle, and our focus for today is a developmental progression. I'm looking forward to exploring that with you in just a couple of minutes once we open this circle. A couple of quick notes. I want to certainly welcome everyone who is here in the Zoom room, as well as everyone who's participating in the YouTube simulcast, whether you're live or on replay. If you'd like to be in the Zoom room, you can always go to exploringdivineresonance.com and add your name and email address. It's free to register, and then you'll be able to participate in each session directly, which gives you the option of asking questions and participating in the conversation, as well as being able to download the video, audio, and transcript of each week's session, as well as each segment of each week. Before we do anything else, let's gather in our circle now, shall we? Setting everything else aside, energetically, emotionally, physically, and otherwise. As always, please don't operate a motor vehicle or heavy equipment of any sort during this or any time we're together. With your eyes closed, breathing in and out through the nostrils, palms to the sky, if all of that is comfortable for you. Finding that place in the circle that resonates most for you. Deep breath in, hold, and as you begin releasing this breath now, letting go of everything that has come before in this day, all the way out to the count of 8. Another deep breath in, hold. And as you begin releasing this breath now, letting go of everything that has come before since we last gathered a week ago. And if this is your first time in the circle, just letting go back to the beginning of the month, all the way out to the count of 8. Another deep breath in, hold. And as you begin releasing this breath now, letting go of everything that has come before since you were born, all the way out to the count of 8. Another deep breath in. Hold. And as you begin releasing this breath now, letting go of everything that has come before since the inception of your soul. Head, heart, hips, mystery. All the way out to the count of 8. See the breath. The breath is becoming you, and you are becoming the breath. Be the breath. The breath of the planet, serving everyone and everything. With each breath, you are connected. And through the breath of the cosmos, you are connected to everyone and everything throughout all of creation, including that energy that underwrites and expresses through and as everyone and everything. The divine, a light originating perhaps at a great distance initially, but as you become aware of it, be with it as it draws closer and closer to you with each breath. Eventually, it draws close enough that you can perceive those twin frequencies that together create and express as the divine light. The frequency of the divine itself and perfect health, such that there is no separating one from the other. Every iteration expressed fully, known and unknown. And the light, be it a waveform or a particle, or a waveform and a particle, eventually connecting in, perhaps initially at your nostrils and then instantaneously throughout every level of your being, known and unknown, an invitation extended to the smallest aspects of you. Come, return to your natural state of resonance and alignment. the artifacts of dissonance appearing to fall away and gather at the universal drain. You may even feel that process expressing as a wave of resonance through your being. The divine is becoming you, and you are becoming the divine. For whatever remains in separation, I invite you to remove the universal plug. I'll do the same. If you'd like to participate in the deeper transmission, with your permission, let's begin. It's wonderful to be with each of you sitting here in this circle, and our theme for today, this developmental progression. There are lots of different contexts we could apply this developmental progression to. You could think of it in terms of your life, or a developmental progression in response to being triggered, or fill in the blank. And here it is. The first expression in this progression is the pursuit of safety. And just sit with that for a moment. Maybe you can remember or reflect on a time in your life, maybe it's now, where safety is the most important or dominating aspect, or perhaps as relates a certain dynamic, a relationship, or a circumstance in your life. Safety is it. That's the most important thing. It's foundational. And it's also illusory, which is sort of challenging. What I mean by that is that in the pursuit of safety, there's no way to ever fully secure it. We can secure the illusion of safety, but it's transitory at best. And so at some point, or in certain circumstances, relationships, or dynamics, another developmental expression takes its place. And the second expression or pursuit is for individual creative expression. And you might think of a time or reflect on a dynamic in your life where that's true, and maybe it's now. There's a little more of a discussion that needs to be had here around individual creative expression. Because while there are a great many ways to pursue or explore individual creative expression, there is an underlying resolution that is being sought through those creative expressions. And it often is obscured underneath all sorts of other things. You could think of it as, if this isn't too dramatic, a core wound, something that is core to your being that enlivened pursuing safety and enlivened the shift into pursuing individual creative expression. So one of the things that's interesting, at least from my perspective, about individual creative expression is that while that may be unfolding even on an ongoing basis, the fulfillment that one is seeking through that dynamic, or the sense of fulfillment one imagines might come from complete individual creative expression, never arrives. It's never experienced, at least not in a sustaining way. And you might be able to reflect on that. There might be an example from ancient or recent history in your own life, or perhaps that's front and center right now for you. And then there's a third form in this developmental progression. And the third form is divine expression. We could call it divine creative expression. And this is a very interesting developmental move that presupposes all sorts of things, which maybe are presupposed or perhaps are experienced. But most essentially, that while the individual pursuit of safety or individual creative expression did not result in resolving that underlying core wound, the more one opens to divine creative expression, the more the wound resolves itself. And from my perspective, these three forms, these three expressions in this developmental progression encapsulate the vast majority of life experiences, dynamics, relationships, and so on. I believe there's a point early in each of our lives before which we were concerned about safety, after which safety became the dominant focus, after which, and for some, the focus on safety persists. And for some, it shifts to that individual creative expression. And for some, that sustains. That's it. And for some, there's a movement into exploring the third developmental aspect, divine expression. And from my standpoint, resolving the challenges that we encounter, or resolving the manner in which we are triggered in our lives and perhaps have a concern or a focus on safety, or a concern or a focus on individual creative expression in response to being triggered. All of the effort within the context of that developmental expression is without resolution. And the resolution is held solely in the third developmental experience, in divine expression. And this is very difficult to work out logically in a linear fashion. Safety is inarguably important. Individual creative expression, without question, essential. Still, the fulfillment that is being sought underneath these is only available in divine expression. And so for me, I come back to sort of this basic aspect of our exploration together, which is to return, in whatever language you describe it, in whatever way you experience it, return to an exploration of divine resonance, of divine presence. Because from my perspective, that is the resolution. It's sort of a non-resolution resolution. It's an unresolved way of resolving. Unresolved in the sense that it doesn't address the impetus for safety or the impetus for individual creative expression per se. Certainly not in the context of those developmental perspectives. Yet, here it is. Here it is underneath everything else. So despite many, many hours and many words expended in an effort to communicate about what this is, or how this works, or categorizing these things as this, or these other things as this, I'm suggesting at the end of the day, no matter what the context is, the experience of divine presence brings resolution. And even no matter where we are developmentally, it might be disruptive, it might be peaceful, it might be an experience of safety, however transitory, but eventually, and it might be profoundly creative and fulfilling in this way, until there's that redirection towards my idea of creative expression. And despite all of the cause for exploring, resolving, understanding, developing a cosmology, a coherent this and that, if we come back to the experience of divine presence, all these other things resolve. And we could have an experience of that without understanding it, without directing it. And the more that that opens up in our lives, perhaps we become more open to the sustaining experience or exploration of divine presence as perhaps even a dominant focus, replacing other pursuits, safety, and individual creative expression, perhaps. The question inevitably arises, is there no safety in divine presence? Or is there not safety? There is. But it's not the safety that's pursued in that first developmental perspective. It's an entirely different quality and characteristic and expression and experience of safety. And the same question can be applied to individual creative expression. Is there no individual creative expression in divine presence? And the answer, there is, but not in the way that we might understand it in that second developmental perspective. And so rather than focusing on those agendas, what I want to invite you to do, not just today, not just as we move into a deeper transmission in silence, but also in your everyday life, no matter what is coming up. Return or step anew into the depth of divine presence and be fully with that experience. It integrates, it embodies, it is who you really are. If you're concluding with this part of the transmission, I invite you to return the universal plug, knowing the transmission will come to a close. Otherwise, let's continue and transition deeper into transmission in silence now. If you're tuning in just for this part of the transmission, I'm affirming the plug has been pulled. We have begun. Beautiful. If you're concluding with this part of the transmission, I invite you to return the universal plug, knowing the transmission will come to a close. Otherwise, we'll continue on. Integration and Q&A. Opening into our third segment now, integration and Q&A. I'm affirming the plug has been pulled. We have begun. And as you likely know, it's self-appointed. So when you're ready, just unmute your line. And it seems there is a line open already. Is that you, Susan?
It is.
Okay. What's coming up for you?
Well, I really appreciate what you were talking about today, because that one really resonates with me.
Mm.
And now I'm feeling a bit like a pendulum swinging. Something's been coming up for me week after week.
Mm-hmm.
When we get to the Q&A and you invite people to unmute themselves and speak, I find I get this tension in my throat. And there's all kinds of thoughts and feelings going on. And it runs like, is anyone else going to say anything? Am I going to be the first one? And usually I am.
Yeah.
And that brings up all kinds of, feelings like, should I wait? I'm feeling a little bit spacey because, like what you were talking about today, like definitely I recognize the security part, and to some extent even the self-expression. The problem with letting the divine express through me is it means not thinking about it. So if it's not going through the brain, how do you get there? But it's like there is an element of that in the sense that if I'm sinking into my hips and just letting whatever flow, the feeling, I don't want to, semantics get in the way, but it's a different experience than if I'm just going in my head and saying, I'm afraid to say anything because. And the funny thing is, like, this in a way has been developing from week to week. It's not that I think about it all the time, but it's a pattern. Like it happens every time we go to Q&A, and I've got this feeling of, well, should I, shouldn't I, should I wait, shouldn't I? And today, after thinking about the security and the self-expression, I remember I was somewhere, well, something came up. I was reminded that when I was an infant, the story goes, I mean, I don't remember it, but the story from my mother goes that I used to cry all day. And we, in the very first place we lived was a rented room. My parents are Holocaust survivors. And my mother was afraid that we would be thrown out because of my crying. So she would try to shush me up. So I don't know, like, again, I don't want to analyze and think about it, but it just came to mind when I'm like, I get this tightness in my throat. And I really envy these people who can, like, I'll be on the street and these people will be singing away and shouting at each other and, just doing all these things. And I'm going, why can't I do that? And that's where I'm at today.
I appreciate you sharing. It's, would you be open to some reflection?
Oh, absolutely.
It's interesting to me that as you're explaining this, you know, at least some of the thing that's coming up is finding voice. And I love that because from my perspective, it speaks to the developmental progression. It speaks to how we work or how we are in our journey in consciousness. And even your sort of meta commentary on your process, your interior experience is speaking to that, is acknowledging that. And then the thing that's coming up to be transmuted, whoop, is showing up in conscious awareness too. And so one thing that I would encourage you to explore at some point, if you're open to it, is being with the feeling without doing anything with it. So, and it might be very uncomfortable for a while. And if the fact that there are people communicating is hard to just feel with it, you could just turn the volume down so there's no input at the auditory level so that you can stay in the interior with all of this tension and feel it without trying to resolve it or break it. That's a way of describing the opportunity for transmutation that I've talked about in this circle. And it seems it's happening anyway, right? I mean, it's coming up, there's this childhood dynamic, this energy, this well, I don't know at what level they are, but it seems like there's some somewhat essential aspect of your experience that's showing up and anchoring to these early experiences that you had as a child. It's really powerful. And then for me, the next step would be, okay, now just be with them. Just let that be. See what happens. Without any need to speak of it or give voice to it. Or, and I wonder if this resonates for you, Susan, disrupt it or break it, break the flow by speaking. Do you think that's true? Do you think do you feel like go ahead. I missed what you said.
Oh, sorry. I just said, I like that. I definitely like that. There's another part to it that just came up as you're speaking. And that was for years, my feeling that I wasn't heard. Like when I did speak, it's like the other person didn't hear me. And that's something else the thought that came up as that developed was I'm not listening to myself. Like I don't hear
Exactly. Which is huge. What a huge thing to realize. Here's this invitation to be present with yourself. Whatever your name is or isn't for what I refer to as the divine, could be the emptiness, the nothing, the whatever, right? It doesn't have to be divine or God or whatever. Whatever your experience of that is, you can just be with you and that presence. And to see where it takes you. You know, the longer you can sit there, what comes, what is unfolding.
And by the same token, when I can't sit anymore, I can let it come back to it. Like I don't have to force myself to stay with it.
Right.
When
Right.
it's done, it's done. And I've gone through all the various names and combination. To me, God works just as well as anything else. It's a
Right.
lot easier than going into all these spirals of what to call it. God works.
It works for me too. I just want to, you know, I want to
Yes.
recognize that that's not necessarily true for everyone. And you can be in whatever that experience is, whatever that presence is with yourself in whatever, and you can sort of push the edge of what has been comfortable before, not to push it, but to stay within the experience, however it's unfolding. If you understand what I'm trying to,
Yes.
yeah, and just
Uh,
see what
I
happens.
Yeah, I love it. I just wanted to make another comment. This is another theme, if you will, that you have brought up before. I once, years ago, had an experience of feeling at one with everything. Like
Mhm.
I just, it's the sort of thing where words just don't describe it. I just felt like I was part of the whole was part of me, and there was no separation. I had that experience once. I haven't had exactly that experience since. I mean, I do get glimmerings of feeling connected to whatever, but that was like a whole universal, if you will, experience that I remember it. It's like it sticks in my mind. Wow, that was really something. But anyway.
One thing, if you're open to the suggestion, to just to remember, is that the attachment to whatever that was stands in the way.
Mm.
Because we really, I mean, whoever the ancient, I think it was an ancient Greek philosopher that said, you can't step in the same river twice, right? It's so the minute we have an anchor point and now we're trying to recreate that, you know, it's effectively like tuning a radio, an old fashioned radio. Back in the day when there were strings attached and you move the dial and it wasn't digital and you could, and then all of a sudden it was the music program or whatever. If that's the idea of tuning in to wholeness, to unity, to the divine, I would try to let that go. It's more of a dance, you know, it's across all frequencies. It's so the question isn't so much what is it, but how is it unfolding within me? Where and how and in what way am I opening up to that here? And which of these developmental perspectives is opening for me? And what does that present for me? And then it can be whatever it is, you know?
I thank you.
Wonderful to be sitting with you and to hear your questions and reflections, Susan. Thank you.
Hi.
We have multiple hellos, and you'd think I would be good at multiple responses, but I can only hear one. So who is the one who is going to speak? We have two, right? Angel and Sue.
Okay, I think you went first.
Okay.
No?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Thank you. So finding words, thank you. And perhaps you can clarify for me. It's been something coming through with the sessions of where we're opening the universal plug,
Mm-hmm.
then we're plugging the universal plug.
Mm-hmm.
And that's always been sort of a, what is that? Because the universe is always flowing.
Mm-hmm.
And this week I had some very imbalanced situations when I was out just in public at the store, running across lots of other people. And this morning in my inner inquiry, they said, because you're going to exalted levels of information, but then you're leaving the house and going out into areas and you have not like brought in my antennas. And so I'm open and I'm open to everything. And then I get surprised that all this other stuff comes in. So I'm going, well, good. I'm going to be with Ken this afternoon. And maybe there's a way for me to more fully grok that under, it's an energy shift of some type. I don't have the words. But I was never aware of plugging anything or closing anything or doing anything before I got out in quote, quote, the public arenas.
So to my view, we've got a couple of different sort of contexts here that I'm hearing you talk about, right? One is a question about the universal plug. And I talked about that in our first session in this series. So if you go back to week 1, you'll find that in the library. And each email, are you getting the weekly emails, the Monday and Wednesday, 2 hours to go kind of thing? In that, you'll see there's a link to each week. So in the bottom, so it'll say, next week, here's week 13, 12, all the way back. Just click on the link week 1, and then you can go in there and I think that's actually going to be more effective than me trying to recreate or go into it with you now, if that's okay to point you towards that. The second scenario, it seems to me, is a function of, in the macro, it's, in my language, a function of integration and embodiment. In the micro, it could easily fall within the framework of sort of the unintegrated empath kind of dynamic. And I did a series prior to starting this class on YouTube, and there's actually a playlist so those videos are enunciated as a playlist around focused on empaths. I believe that's true. If it's not true, forgive me for having in which case I'll put them on a playlist. But and please do tell me, don't just suffer in silence. Just send me an email or something and say, hey, Ken, can you help me out? I'm not finding those. But if you look at those videos, I think what you'll find is a couple of focused practices for coming to an experience of your presence, of divine presence and your presence, just for you, within you, in any context.
Right.
And to my view, that is an essential developmental step. Having that first is critical, I would say, because without that, you're having an experience of it. So why go into it, right? You understand it can be very disorienting and sort of confusing and so on. And it can be also entertaining, I suppose, in some ways, but the entertainment value, I would guess, diminishes over time, because ultimately it's the integrated experience that resonates with the whole self, not the separate experience. And so while the separate self tends to resonate with experiences of drama and so on, as one integrates, so those would be two resources that I would point you towards. Is that helpful?
Yes, thank you.
Beautiful. Anything else coming up that you want to ask about?
With the stages that you brought into awareness today, it feels like, I feel like when I'm at 100, when I'm totally in presence, then there isn't anything else. However, with the stages, I'm feeling multiple aspects that are in multiple stages within me in the moment.
Right.
And it's not always confusing. It's just, I'm aware of different, I'm just going to call them threads, operating simultaneously. And if I'm able to stay in my heart, they seem, like you said, to just kind of go through. And they do seem more of an option if I was to focus on one thread or another. But it feels to me to let them go through, because the mastery perhaps, or the way I'm choosing to feel, is that more unified placement that isn't necessarily any of those.
Okay. And one thing that might be interesting is what happens if you shift from a heart dominated perspective to a hips dominated perspective. So you shift from a feeling to a being. And it's an embodied development, not a move of intellect or focus.
Yes.
And see what follows there.
Well, that's what I call the presence. For me, the presence is, I call it the knowing, or just the isness of all of it. And that's when I can see the streams, but I'm not the streams, but I am the streams.
Yeah.
It's all happening together.
Yeah, I mean, this resonates for me. Maybe I'm missing the question in it. Yeah, can you clarify? Is there a question?
I just, perhaps just validation, maybe, that this is part of the ascension process, or that other people are having something like this. I just haven't experienced in the physical much feedback on it, I guess.
Okay. Well, in me, you're going to get a couple of curveballs here. And I'll comment on this a bit, and then we can bounce to Sue and see what she was coming up for her, and come back if there's more. First of all, although I appreciate that referring to this as an ascension process resonates with a great many people, that language doesn't resonate with me. I don't think we're departing the plane. I don't think we are ascending. I think we're descending. That's my perspective. That's how I perceive it. So why do I perceive it that way? I perceive it that way because, to me, we're not escaping the human condition. We're coming to a more intimate experience of it. And through that more intimate, embodied experience of the human condition, we open more fully to divinity. As Keating said, and I'm sure he wrote this, but he spoke it to me when I interviewed him, we must first be fully human before we can be fully divine. And I think many times there's a focus on how can I be divine, and let the human come with it, or drop that. So, but as for the experiences that you're describing, yes, I can validate, but notice what the role or the value of the validation is. The whole self does not need validation. So the separate self is seeking validation. The separate self is the thing that's integrating. If it's looking for satisfaction and it receives it, what happens? It's amplified, right?
Right.
So my encouragement would be to be, it's very similar actually to what I was saying to Susan, be with the discomfort that arises and expresses as a desire for validation, even as you're with the overall experience. And since you're sitting in a circle that I'm facilitating, I want to reinforce what I perceive as the very essential aspect of this journey, of this process, whatever we're going to call it, as unfolding and deepening within the vessel of the body. It's an embodied experience, and open to the intimacy with the divine and all human aspects of the experience of that vessel in the process. How's that?
Thank you.
Thanks for being here, Angel. Sue, I'm going to bounce over to you.
Hey, I sent you an email this afternoon, which I tried to unsend, but you can't really unsend emails, so ignore it. But I'll do it here anyways. So I've been doing the feeling it, stay with it, transmute it thing. And what I'm getting is things are intensifying. I spent the day calling crisis lines because they're anonymous and nobody knows that I'm making a fool of myself, in abject despair and horror and that I haven't really felt. Perhaps I felt when I was a child. And I do the meditation, or I sit with them and I transmute them, and they get stronger. And it's been going like this, like especially since December. I just get stronger and stronger, and it's so I wrote you this email that I was in emotional crisis, and I suppose I was. I don't know, but I don't know if it's happening now or it happened before. I have no ground. I feel like I can't even go outside. I'm waiting to be attacked or something, or I don't. Just bizarre, nasty, disembodied, dissociated. I'm sure I felt like this when I was a kid, possibly when I was drinking. How come it's not, I don't know if it's transmuting or it just keeps coming back stronger, like there's another state and another state. And yeah, last night I went to my daughter's for dinner, a lovely dinner. It was interesting. There was her husband's family, which is kind of falling apart. They've been irresponsible redneck drunks for years, and it just doesn't work anymore. And her friend who had this extraordinary baby who was like 3 months old and was so different. And just like they say, the new babies are different, just so aware and mature. And it was amazing. And then I came home and I went into this state of despair. I stayed with it the whole time and woke up this morning. I was freaked out, and I'm still freaked out. And these techniques have worked for me for years, and now they seem to, wow, I don't know, it's intense and strange. And what do I do? Yeah.
Sue, I am appreciating you giving voice to your experience, and I apologize for not seeing your email. I'm not glued to email during the day, and sometimes not attentive to it even on a day over day basis, which I feel bad about. It's something I'd like to get better at.
I was just a panicked 4-year-old. Like, I don't think it's relevant, really. I don't know. I don't think it's happening now. I'm not sure, but anyway.
Well, we've talked a lot in the deep dive about this dynamic, and I appreciate you bringing it up here as well. I think it's so I think I want to kind of circle and talk about some of the things we have before, and then maybe also suggest a few things and just see what resonates for you. If we look at the dynamic between what I call the separate and the whole self, and the opening to a deeper experience of divine presence and what happens as a result of that. One of the things that I have perceived for a long, long time is that the remaining dissonance appears to become more pronounced. And that is confusing in and of itself, probably for obvious reasons. And the challenge is, to my mind, is that in the vacillation between the opening or the embodiment or the transmutation and, let's say, pursuing relief, if that's a fair way of referring to it, is that there can be a lot of attachment to what that relief looks like until there is, until that I want to call it a breaking point, although that may not be helpful language based on how you're feeling, but until that breaking point where control is ceded and surrender floods. So it's, if we look at, any part of the micro macro process for addressing or overcoming, they are all incomplete from my perspective without surrender. And the challenge with surrender is that we don't know what comes next. And so if we find ourselves agitated, upset, etc., I mean, one thing, I'll just say this for myself. One thing, if I'm having that experience, one thing I can say for sure is that I haven't surrendered yet fully, because as long as I'm unhappy with something that's unfolding, I'm not in a surrendered state. Or to say it in the affirmative, and I realize all these things, we've talked about them before, Sue, but just by way of including this circle in our conversation, I believe one knows when one has surrendered fully, when we accept everything exactly as it is. And that is a really, really hard concept for the separate self. So anyway, there's the context from my sort of perceptual lens. And for me, these things are speaking to the experience of, and the power of, and the momentum of the separate self in remaining engaged in some expression of control. And I just want to pause here for lots of different reasons, but mostly because I see a big divine intuitive stop sign in front of me, like, be quiet here, Ken, and see let's just give this some space. Does something come up for you, Sue?
I can't force surrender.
No, that's right.
So enter this process because I believe in process, that it'll take me there.
Yeah.
And maybe it will. But it doesn't feel like discomfort at this point. It feels like freaking torture.
Right, I understand.
What am I looking for? I don't know. Like, I'm a validation. Am I going to be okay? How am I going to? I don't feel like I can do anything. I'm just like, I don't. It's, oh my God! It's just very overwhelmingly intense, and yeah, taking up my whole screen, and
yeah.
And I'm reaching for just something that'll give me a life raft to float on.
Right.
And say, I don't know, but it's. I mean, I don't know. What have I done in my lifetime? I can't go out and drink like I used to in the past. Haven't had a drink in 13 years, but because that would kill me. I mean, that would just drain so much energy. I'd be lost. There would be no chance. I keep staying in this process, keep going. I have to just stay with it. And if it gets ugly, it gets ugly. But then it gets ugly. It's like I have no cushion for the ugly. I'm just not parrying it at all. I'm just not carrying it. It's worrisome. I don't know. And I sound like I did when I was a kid, and I'm pretty whiny, and I don't like myself much. It's just like I'm not finding any little lights going on these days. So what am I doing? I'm begging you to solve the problem for me, which you can't. I don't know. I
Yeah.
don't know what I'm doing. I'm just going through it. Or it's
Well,
going through me.
one of the things that's coming, is it okay if I share something, Sue?
Yes, please.
One of the things that's coming up for me is how profoundly powerful it is to be able to, be with you as you're being the authentic expression of your experience. And I think it's so essential to acknowledge, what obviously is your experience, but if we put this in the context of the overall range of experiences, and allow or accept, as I do, that this is part of that very normal range of experience, that alone is normalizing in the sense that you're not alone, you're not the only one going through this, and so on. And from my perspective, there's comfort in that, in the sense that as we step into the unknown, the mystery of whatever it is when we integrate, whatever unfolds when we let go of control, I think that's phenomenally meaningful and powerful. And I personally appreciate it. I appreciate your willingness to give voice to it, to stand in the authentic experience of what's unfolding for you. And I also appreciate your ability to recognize what it is that you're looking for, and the illusory dynamic that it represents. You just said, I'm looking for you to solve this, but you can't solve it. And you are somebody who possesses incredible spiritual awareness, and it's such an important point of awareness and participant in the integration process to recognize that awareness, no matter how profound, until it's integrated, remains a source of dissonance, because there's a gap between how we think things should be, ought to be, actually are in true reality, or whatever that is that I'm trying to point towards, in contrast to the experience of suffering that is unfolding. And without any, desire or interest or accidental tripping over of the idea that the suffering isn't meaningful, that it isn't real, that it isn't painful. Again, awareness can come in and create additional tension here. I can just speak from first person about this. It's not even as a witness. I'm saying in my own experience, that awareness in some ways fans the flames of suffering, because it's almost like the experience is, I know this is different than it is, and yet my knowing of that isn't changing anything right now. I'm still suffering, and I can't deny that I'm suffering. So if I were to offer a suggestion, the suggestion I would make is that the being present with what is in an embodied dynamic the transmutation takes place not by one's own resources, but by divine presence. And your role, my role, anyone's role in that process is the feeling, experience, and expression of the noise, not of the imagined or hoped for resonance. And even if surrender is, I surrender that this will end, or that there's anything other than this, and then allowing yourself to be present in the feeling experience with no resolution, with no intended resolution, with no hoped for outcome, with no name. In other words, just there's your entry point into the mystery. I wonder if that could be a meaningful process for you in your process, as a way of opening into the unknown of divine presence, and consequently, likely, the more complete experience and expression of the, you're right, I say discomforts, but the agony of your separate self. I say discomfort because it's a natural instinct to want to lighten the language, but I'm not trying to lighten the language to minimize. It's a way of lightening the language to reframe, but maybe that's not helpful. So let's call it what it is, the agony of the separate self.
I think I'm really feeling what I felt when I was a kid. Like as if it's happening right now. And I'm judging it the way I judged it when I was a kid, and the way the world responded when I was a kid.
Mm-hmm.
An interesting thing about this year of getting closer and closer to how horrible it was for me as a child, or how I interpreted it as horrible, and how people's responses seemed to validate that it was horrible and wrong and bad and evil and all that shit, is that people don't respond that way now.
Right.
You could say it's interesting, and that you appreciate it is not exactly what they said to the kid. Hardly, as a matter of fact.
Right, of course.
And I'm just terrified of how people are going to, who's going to talk to me if they know I feel this way, or if I tell them, or even if they just guess it, like, right. But the present moment is not really working out that way.
Right.
Which is, wow, is bizarre.
Yeah.
So like there's different threads of experience. I got like 10 timelines going all at the same time.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm sure you're hearing this, but is it okay if I make an observation, Sue? Mm-hmm. Notice how, or at least to my ear, more than my ear, to my witness, what is not quite, but sort of, let's just say that, it's like the circuits aren't fully expressed. You're triggered back to that experience, but you're not allowing it to complete. You're not allowing yourself to go into it all the way. You're stopping, you're holding it. What if people knew I'm having the experience I had before, and then the loop goes? And that loop will persist as long as you are identified in it.
But that was part of the experience before too, was feeling that way, right?
For sure, right? But that's always true, right? It's like the fractal of divinity includes the fractal of separation, which is an endless loop until it's not anymore, right? Exactly. So if you allow yourself, when you're ready, instead of that narration, this is what was happening when and how it was, if you come to the feeling experience of it, the raw experience as a 7-year-old or a 10 or 15-year-old, as you now, not, in other words, there's an integrated dynamic there that isn't about an arm's length narration of it. There's no story. It's the
Could
raw
I just be blubbering?
experience. No, I know, but I think the blubbering, I don't mean it critically. I just mean the blubbering, as you're calling it, is, to me, is illuminating the loop.
Mhm.
And the loop, at least as I hear it, as I see it, is in part the story of what happened and it's happening again. What if it's just an experience that is very similar, maybe identical, but if you allow it to consume you, you don't know where it ends. You don't know how it ends. Now you're into the mystery. Just a thought. Perhaps meaningful perspective, perhaps not.
I don't know. Then how would you live? Then how do I eat? Then how do I make dinner?
Well, I mean, I think the questions that you're asking are absolutely reasonable and make perfect sense. And at least in the ways that I've asked myself these questions as I faced deeper levels of surrender, of which I am in the middle of that too in my life, I set aside the answers to those questions because, at least in me, I perceive myself as tossing out fishing lines into the mystery to hook something and draw it back to me as a form of reassurance. And I know from the past that when I surrender, the noise there is of my creation and the divine is complete. So I am always supported and cared for, even if I don't know how that's happening or even what it is that's happening, even as it's happening in a surrendered state. So certainly asking the question ahead of time, at least for me, has only ever perpetuated the experience of separation. It's never moved me to a place of deeper release, to a deeper surrender. Because at least in me, I perceive those questions when I ask them, and I ask them all the time, as an attempt, as I say, to draw back from the mystery, something, a cookie, something to hold on to, a handhold, something, give me something. And those somethings are an enlivenment to my separate self. Whereas when it's ready to surrender, there no foothold or handhold, the lack of a foothold or a handhold or any information is what is most helpful for me. Because with a foothold or a handhold, I'm not willing to let go of control, because there's hope. If I understand that, maybe I can understand more. And if I can understand more, I don't have to let go of control. I don't have to pass through this doorway. This doorway I can avoid.
All I can say is, in talking to you and in listening to you talk, some of the sane human being that I am, who isn't just consumed with emotion, I can see. I can see what's happening. Yes, it's amazing. I just have to continue with it until I surrender, because I can't just say I'm going to surrender or I'm not going to. It's like, it's not a volition. It's like a threshold or something.
Brilliant, Sue.
Yeah,
Thank
it's
you.
been a very strange year indeed.
Indeed.
Thank you very much for talking to me. Ignore my email if you ever get it. Yeah.
I'll get it and I'll say hi in response, but I'm grateful for the opportunity to sit and explore in this way with you today, and for your
I hope I
presence
didn't
as
bore
always.
anybody. Thank you very much.
Who cares if people are bored? That's not for us to think about or concern ourselves with.
Thank you
Thank
so
you, Sue.
much.
Hey, Ken and Sue, I just want to say I'm never bored on these, and I always get wisdom and enlightenment. So thank you very much.
Great to hear your voice, Gary. And thank you for your kind words.
Hey, Ken.
How are you, Brian?
Not too bad. How are you? I wanted to say too that that conversation with you and Sue was enlightening, and I can offer what my experience is, which resonates a lot with what she's going through. It doesn't speak to hers specifically, she's having her experience, but I've also realized that as I delve deeper into this, that more and more is being brought up, and I've often questioned what I'm doing wrong because it seems like that suffering seems to increase. But I realize as an adult, my perspective and stuff is, and going into these more situations of being more resonant or shifting how I look at it, how I'm able to look at it. And I begin to think, and I might not be right, but I think for me, I'm starting to feel like starting to feel things I haven't felt since I was a teenager, things I've suppressed, things I'd forgotten about, things I really don't want to remember. But I think for me, it's almost like peeling the layers of an onion. Like I started dealing with this stuff stuff came up for me that was more recent. And of course, when you think of being a teenager, you build things on top of that. You have more experiences and more problems that build on top of that. So if you have to peel the layers of the onion to get down to where you were at, to be able to experience that stuff again, if that makes any sense. And so, I'm experiencing that stuff, but what's probably crazy for me in the fact that I don't considerably like going through that stuff again. It's different this time. It's not as intense because I'm not completely embroiled in it, is also living in that field of resonance at the same time, having this more expansive view. It's like having your foot in two different worlds at the same time, and it's a little bit disorienting because of that. But I think it keeps me from completely going into the negative experience of all this past stuff coming up. Hopefully that makes some sense.
It does. Can I reflect on something, Brian, or would that?
Yes, of course.
One of the things that I think is really important to point out is that the value of being witnessed while feeling the noise is potentially significant, because there's no obligation to hold the container, to have one foot in two worlds, to use your language. You can just be in whatever the experience is of that deeper layer of the onion without being identified in it. And that might be a meaningful reflection, and it may not be, but it's something I wanted to
it makes
reference.
sense. I think that's what I've been doing is observing, sort of. I mean, you can't help but still feel those emotions and things. I can't be completely separate, at least not at this point, but observing it from being, I guess, stepped back into resonance. And maybe that's what's helping me.
Interestingly, I'm suggesting the opposite. So what I'm suggesting is that, for example, when we go into transmission in this circle, if something is coming up, to hold nothing back, to fully commit oneself to the experience of the noise, to feel it, not identify with it, to feel it fully. The identification happens when there's a narrative that goes with it. If there's a story, in other words. So this is part of blah, 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 right? There's the narrative. That's the identification. But if we can stay out of narrative and in the raw feeling without trying to step back into the resonance, as you said, that's where the transmutation happens. It's when you feel fully Allow it to consume you while being witnessed. The ability for an individual to witness himself in that dynamic is an expression of phenomenal integration and embodiment. It's a practice that, I mean, I acknowledge that it exists, but it's not one to even focus on from my perspective in terms of developing it, because it is so fraught with loopholes, with risk, with challenge, with, it's not that there's a risk like, ooh, danger. The risk is that you dance on the line of, I'm in a space of resonance and there's this other stuff, but there's never fully going into the other stuff. So it never transmutes. So you're just dancing. I don't mean you, Brian. One is forever dancing in this way, right? Resonance, dissonance, resonance, dissonance. Whereas when one is being witnessed, supported in that process, you can go all the way into the dissonance column without being identified and feel fully. Doesn't make any sense, but that's where it gets transmuted. Anyway, for what that's worth.
Well, okay. All right. That's a different way of looking at it. A lot of these experiences were happening outside of transmission, and the resonance dissonance thing was happening automatically. So I'll just have to kind of play with it.
Exactly. And listen, there are plenty of different ways to be witnessed. I'm not trying to make this about me or how God expresses through me. I just know that in that expression is a resource. And in this circle, it's free. You can download the recordings. There's no entanglement with money or anything here. And I don't even want there to be an entanglement with me. So I'm just acknowledging what, in whatever way one is being supported in being embodied, witnessed in the embodiment, it's there. That's one of the aspects of the equation. The other critical aspect is that you, whomever is going through this, is feeling fully whatever's coming up. And to try to do that for oneself is virtually impossible, except in very, very integrated and embodied states. And I mean, I think for me, it's meaningless to talk about. I mean, even if I go back to, I don't, I have a couple of active groups right now that are in some ways very, very advanced, but not formally so, as in not, we haven't been sitting together over the course of years as part of a formal progression. But the last time I was part, and there's nothing wrong with that, that's not the point. The point is, the last time I was part of a formal progression that I was teaching, and a group had been together for a number of years. And I mean, some of these are messengers who are out in the world in kind of a big way. I'm still saying, look, to witness oneself is a pursuit that is fraught with a dynamic of sort of being stuck on the hamster wheel. So since you're here, since you have me as a resource, just utilize that resource and focus on transmuting rather than trying to develop this capacity. It's not that you can't, you will, it will happen, and so on. But the fact that there's noise coming up right now, why complicate things? Why make things messier than they need to be? It's messy enough to feel fully the noise. And I mean, maybe therein lies the aha, right? I can avoid feeling the noise if I'm doing both things. I don't know that that's happening for you, Brian. I'm just saying maybe that's the appeal. And from my perspective, if I'm, spelling it out for somebody, I'm guiding in the way that I've been trying to guide you in the group, which is to say, let go of that. Yes, you are a profound presence of divine expression, but let go of that. Allow yourself to be the noise, fully express it, let it consume you while you're witnessed by someone else. And then there, and only there, in the sense that you're fully allowing yourself to express, not about the other witness, just in the full expression in combination with being embodied, there is the transmutation that opens the unpacking and the integration of the gift of whatever was previously experienced in dissonance.
Gotcha. That's helpful. That'll next time, hopefully that happens. Like I said, mostly these things seem to spontaneously occur.
Right.
Transmission, nothing really happens other than real peaceful and stuff like
Right.
that. So
Right.
I really would love for that to happen, because you said I'd love to transmute it, but it's helpful for dealing with the next time it comes up to try to,
Yeah.
no matter where I am or what I'm doing, to try to process a little differently.
Yeah.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. Of course. Thanks, Brian. Thanks for being here.
I wanted to add my 2 cents worth.
Okay.
I actually, well, I have to be careful of my language, but I identify with Sue's story because I remember going through a similar feeling experience.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, I didn't know you. I wasn't meditating. I didn't know any light workers or truth seekers or whatever you would call, and messengers. And it was so bad, I freaked myself out so badly that the only thing I could do was surrender and let go.
Right.
And it would have been nice to have a witness, but that was not available. And actually, with my personality, having a witness would have freaked me out, because it's like, don't let anybody see me. Well, something changed after that. And I mean, I can still get scared, but it's never as bad as it was at that one point.
Brilliant. What's fascinating about that is that whatever led you to surrender, whatever it was, it stopped being in the way because you surrendered, right? So the mechanism of transmutation is only interesting if that's the thing that's going on, if that's the point of stuckedness. But the resolution of that just opens the pathway to surrender, because noise triggers lead to expressions of control, generally, not always, right? Except when they don't. And ultimately, right, when they don't, what do we discover? Relief, right? When I let go of control.
Yeah, the fascinating thing was, whatever it was I was afraid of, whatever I was afraid was going to happen, it was like I don't even remember the circumstances anymore, but whatever it was I was afraid of, it was like once I surrendered, it's like it was gone.
Right.
Life went on, my life went on,
right,
and I'm still here.
Exactly. So on the other side of surrender is, what's the old adage? Chop wood, carry water. It's not, the point is, after we let go of control, we don't have to assert control anymore, because we're having a deeper experience of the flow of divine presence. But we don't even have to language it that way. It's just me trying to break it apart and give little labels, in this part of the chart, in this part of the journey, we've got this little thing hanging here. But to your point, it never was an issue again. Hallelujah. What a beautiful way of reflecting on the liberation that comes with letting go of control. And there is not one way to let go of control. There are an endless number of ways to let go of control, for sure. Thank you, Susan.
The interesting thing about what's going on now is, I think I've gone through this before, like maybe 10 years ago when I started doing all this work. But then I had acted it out. Like it was 13 years ago, but I had been drinking, and my life was just a mess, and I acted it out, and my life manifested the feeling. And now I'm not, and sometimes in some way, not even deliberately, but deliberately too, not acting out what I'm feeling so much, so that I'm making my life bad. or, and that seems even harder. It makes it harder to let
Right,
go.
right,
It was
right.
easier to let go because I needed things to be better, but my life is good. And that's making it hard. I mean, and if I call people and cry, I'm calling crisis lines. I don't know that person. I'll never see them. So, yeah, if you did that with your next door neighbor or your friend, they'd get annoyed with you after a while. Yeah, so it's harder. It's just harder somehow.
Yeah. The things that are unsurrendered generally are harder, whatever they are, however they're encountered, or at least that's how they feel.
I keep thinking that, or when I'm thinking like in that experience as a kid, that I'm broken and I have to be fixed, that there's something wrong with me, right?
Right.
Because if I'm not broken and I don't have to be fixed, then remembering my childhood is remembering that I knew when I was a kid about what was going to happen 60 years in the future, which I did on so many levels. And that what does that say about what it means to be alive, or different timelines? And that's the hard thing to integrate, I think. And I'm not linear. Yeah, whatever. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Sue. I mean, to my ear, what you're giving voice to is the encumberments that come with knowledge, with awareness. It's with awareness comes the supposition of deeper insight and closer to the truth. But as long as it's held from this is a complete cosmology or part of a complete cosmology perspective, it's still held in separation. So the attempt to weave it together, there's the separate self expressing control, and there's no resolution. But it's easy to get into metacognitive loops at that point, or meta spiritual loops, because the distraction is, why doesn't this fit together? That has to integrate. If it were integrated, it would all align and make sense, but it can't, because the things in separation don't align with the things in wholeness necessarily. And if we think that when it integrates, it will align, then we'll be stuck there on that, at that conflict, until we can let go of the idea that the cognitive dissonance will be resolved. It may be resolved experientially, but it won't be resolved intellectually. If it were, then the separate self would be the most efficacious expression. And as far as I can tell, it's not. It's efficacious in delivering the things that are in the queue to be integrated, but their integration may or may not resemble the manner in which they come into our awareness.
So a session with you would still be a good idea.
I think it's I would welcome the opportunity, Sue, but I've said that before to you, and I'm always hesitant to jump in and say, well, you need to do this, or what happens in a private session is, I don't know. The mystery is present, things are amplified, and it's two of us instead of however many of us. So that could be a very meaningful dynamic. And anyone who goes into that dynamic thinking there's going to be a solution in separation will be sorely disappointed. And that's probably not funny, but for some reason it makes me giggle. So I'm sorry I'm giggling. I don't mean to laugh at. I think what I'm laughing at is my separate self who wishes to have everything bend together. These ideas that we are going to have, everything is going to fit together intellectually. I so resonate with that. I pursue it, but it's a pursuit without a result, or without a result other than just enough suffering to eventually surrender. Well, this has turned into quite a marathon today. I trust that it's been meaningful and helpful, perhaps in ways that make sense, and also in ways that may not make any sense, maybe ever, but even potentially not immediately. In any case, I'm so grateful for the conversation, for your participation, your presence, for the opportunity to sit and explore and resonate. Let's take a deep breath in and hold. And as you begin releasing this breath now, release yourself from whatever attachments in favor of or in resistance to. Let all of them go. And open to receive the mystery after you have exhaled completely. And as your breath returns to whatever normal cadence, breadth, and depth, notice the invitation each breath contains to release entirely and then to receive anew. Invite you to return the universal plug. I'll do the same as I bring this transmission to a close. It is an honor, as always, to sit and explore with you. Anyone who is participating off the Zoom room in any other way, through the YouTube live stream, simulcast, replay, or in other ways, the podcast and so on. If you'd like to be part of the Zoom room or be able to download any audio, video, transcripts, and so on of each and every segment in this series, you can go to exploringdivineresonance.com. It's free. Add your name and email address. You'll get a login to my online learning platform, the Resonance Institute, and there you will find in your library Exploring Divine Resonance and all the weeks so far, at least. And as whenever we bring this circle to a conclusion, all the weeks will be there, the transcription for every segment, the audio, the video, the study guides, and more. Until we're together again. Peace.